So this is going to be a little bit different in the fact that I'm going to rant about a variety of dumb things. That's all I can say. There's a lot going on in our world right now that is just horrific on so many stupid levels. So I feel like I need to come on here and rant a little bit this morning, even if I have been having something of a cold lately. Just realized I don't have a lot to drink. Okay, so this may be quick. If you don't know who I am Suzanne Tidkemeyer, author of upcoming book with Strange Fire. Hey, JJ, I also wrote for Pathos, Grace Peter, for over 10 years, a column called No Longer Quivering about the quiverful movement. So that's me. I do all this stuff. Okay. So there's been a lot going on this week, and I've been really tempted to just, hey, Elizabeth Ann, jump on and rant about so many things. I know these are just my stupid opinions, but I certainly have enough opinions about all of this to go on and rant every single day if I wanted to against people. But since I'm always saying, don't harass anybody, just let them be. I've restrained myself. I didn't jump on last night when I really wanted to, when I saw that our dear Katherine is harassing the hell out of Ginger Duggar Volo right now. It's funny. She went from ripping Ginger and ripping Ginger's book to kissing Ginger's rear end, and now she is going after her with fire and fury, which is kind of funny because the thing she's going after her about are things she herself has done. She's trying to claim that Ginger is harming victims. Girl, do you not hear yourself speak? Since Katie Joy has gone after the IBLP so many times, I know of at least 4 helplines where they're getting people out. Java man, we were talking just very briefly about the troll. 4 helplines, Underground Railroad type situations that have gone dark because of Katie Joy's talking about this. She is the one that is genuinely harming victims. And I had somebody the other day said, why are you so fixated on them saying hollow tubes instead of 1/4-inch plumbing line? And I need to explain that too. I answered the person after I thought about it a while. I think the reason that I've gotten so just incensed over the use of terms like hollow tubes, plastic wands, is because pot meat kettle, maybe. Yeah. So I've gotten really incensed over this because language is powerful. And to say it's hollow tubes or plastic hollow things minimizes the true horror and damage of what these things are. These things are 1/4-inch plastic plumbing lines. And that is the language they use in Michael Pearl's book to train up a child. Think about that for a minute. Plumbing line on a small child's tender thighs. The more I think about that, the more I want to cry. So when they use minimizing language in the media, I become very, 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 very angry. JJ, I figured that's what you meant. Yeah. Perhaps we should start a decoy Underground Railroads to keep her busy. Well, Java Man, this is hopefully one of the last times I'm going to rant directly about her. Before, I was more incensed about the language that was being used, that I didn't want to call it reporting, her lackadaisical videos were minimizing the implements that these people are using on their children that are causing physical harm. In some cases, physical harm that has to be repaired, physical harm that stunts kids' growth. I mean, when you start whacking the biscuits out of somebody with something like that, there's going to be damage. Her drivel, exactly. Her drivel minimizes, trivializes the damage that's being done. And that's why I'm so angry with her over all of this. Last night, I was just out of my box angry when I saw what she was saying about Ginger the day after she kissed Ginger's ass. But I got up this morning and I thought, why am I ever that angry at her? She is a derivative of a derivative of a derivative. There's not an original thought. There's not an original, there's not original anything. So I'm beginning to think least said, soonest mended. That the sooner all of us stop talking about her in any way, shape, or form, the sooner she has to move her ass on down the road and get a real job. Real job! Something I worked for years at. The flogging will continue until morale improves. That describes a number of jobs I've had in the past. And yeah, you don't beat somebody to ensure compliance. That's the worst way. My father made the mistake about 5 or 6 times of whacking the biscuits out of me. And what happened was, if you know anything about me, I'm stubborn. I'm very stubborn. And he would hit me and I would say, that didn't hurt. It hit me harder. That didn't hurt. And it just kept on until I ended up with significant bruising. I mean, the kind of bruising that sends you to the ER on my butt. That I was in legs, but I was not about to give in. Not once, because I was that kind of kid. So my father didn't do it but like 5 or 6 times and realized that that was never going to work with me. That I would fight him to the death. I would be, thank you, sir, but I have another, like you're saying, Java man. I was raised with this theology. All it does is breed resentment. Grace Peter, exactly. There are better ways to ensure compliance if you're worried about making sure your children do what you want. I came up with my own child psychology for ensuring compliance, and my kids were good kids. So I never had to use anything like what I was thinking. But later, after my children were grown, I ran across this thing called Love and Logic. And it's very similar to the way that I raise my kids, because hitting just breeds resentment. It breeds lying. It breeds so many good, not so good things. Hey, Great Dane Mom. So that's why I'm so incredibly opposed to Michael Pearl and the way he does things entirely. I have heard Grace Peter, and I've successfully raised kids who were obedient, and I never had to raise a hand. Minis, minus literally a handful of times. For example, they ran into a busy street. Grace Peter, that might be one of the few times I think it's acceptable to whack somebody on the rear end, is maybe if they were trying to run in the street. But not very many times. I just don't think that physical violence is the way to go. I never have. And sadly enough, in the Quiverful movement, there are Michael Pearl and others that teach that you beat. That's just what they do. Lorna, okay. I was brought up by an abusive adopted mother. At the age of 59, I've just come to dealing with the damage caused. She died in 77. Lorna, let me address that too. Let me encourage you. I was 62, okay? During this trip to see my mother, well, right before it, I had a recovered memory of my father and my mother making me ride my bicycle. Back in 1968, I had begged my parents for this certain bicycle that was at the Western Auto in our little town. It was blue metallic flake, the most beautiful bike I'd ever seen. It had a steering wheel instead of handlebars, and I was just all about that. I wanted this thing. I asked for Christmas. I said, don't buy me anything else, just buy me this bike. They bought me the bike. None of that is abusive or horrible. Where the abuse and the horribleness comes in is the fact that the bike was too big for me. There was no way to lower the seat low enough for me to ever be able to ride that thing. I would try to ride it. I couldn't even put my feet on the ground unless I was tilted like this. I kept falling off. I fell off more times than you could count. There was a 6-month period where I had scraped knees, scraped elbows, bruises, bumps, whatever, because every damn afternoon, my mother or my father would force me to go with the bike and them to the local school basketball, volleyball court and ride it. I cried, I begged, I pleaded not to ride that bike. And they were merciless. It was like, you will learn to ride this bike. Well, I hadn't thought about this in years, and it popped into my mind. I started thinking about it, and I got angry because, as somebody who's raised children and done it, and my kids are great. I don't know that I did such a great job, or maybe they were just great people. I don't know. But I started thinking about it. I was thinking that was really a really shitty thing for them to do because it was a developmental issue. It was a developmental issue. I was not tall enough to effectively, ride the bike. The bike was too big for me, and that is why I kept falling off the bike. It was not anything I was doing. It was just the wrong size. And instead of my parents doing like I would have done and just taking the bike and said, let's just put this aside till you grow a little bit more. My parents were determined I was going to ride it. I was telling my aunt this story and she said, do you know why? And I said, no, why would a parent do that? That's abusive. I said, because it reflected badly on them. And I started thinking about that. And she's right. My parents were all about appearances. My mother is still all about appearances, which is funny because I don't give a rat's patoot about appearances. In World War II, after the first Hummy bombing, one POW was being tortured, and they asked him, how many of these things do they have? He said, 100. They have enough? 3 a day for the next month. Drop 3 a day. Yeah, it happens. Parents, you know, think they're going to break your will. They're going to force their way on you. They perceived that I was being rebellious and not riding the bike. But the truth of the matter is I was just not developmentally able to ride the bike. Now, did I ride the bike later? Yeah, when I grew about 3 inches. But before that, it became a daily frustrating ritual. So, Lorna, please take comfort in that stupid story because these things keep coming up and you have to deal with them. You deal with them in your mind and you have to release. You have to think about it and say, yeah, that really sucked. I would never do that to my child. And then you have to, I guess, find a way to forgive and move on. And knowing that they were all about appearances, man, I was so angry with my mother. I didn't want to be around her on this trip because of the memory that had just come up right before. The sad thing is when I mentioned the memories to my aunt immediately went into your father did X, Y, and Z that I didn't know about. Some of that I had as suspicions, but I didn't know about him, and I could have done without all that knowledge. Hey, Megan. So was my mother. What will the neighbors think? Oh, they do think I'm a woke person because I don't follow any of that anymore, Lorna. And that's a shitty way to live. But I know that back in the 50s, the 60s, especially the early 60s, that is how people were raised. And so some of that is just cultural. It was how they were raised. Doesn't make it any less damaging knowing that, but it just is what it is. It shows a real liability of information obtained under torture. Yeah. Torture is not a good way to get information, even for children that you're trying to discipline. And that breaks my heart that the IBLP and others, including John MacArthur and his church, Grace Community Church, they believe in physical punishment of children. I think if you physically punish your children, you breed violence. I mean, they have statistics on all of this. John MacArthur says, oh, those statistics are wrong because he doesn't approve of the methodology of how the information was obtained. I don't know. I think those things are right on the money, right on the money. So I don't recommend that. I know that there are a lot of people that do. I'm not one of them. I'm very opposed to that now. So moving on to the stupidity that is Unirock. And um, somebody dug up an arrest record for supposedly for Unirock that says that he was arrested for domestic violence. I'm not going to jump on that and say, oh, he was arrested for domestic violence because I just don't know. Here's what I do know about the internet and about people trying to, get one up on everybody. Now, I went after Unirock over his possibly fake military service record, and I still do not believe, based on some things I've seen, that he was in the military. I still believe that. I've not seen proof. Some things he's shown don't line up with what I know about the military. Let's just say that. But this domestic violence report, internet, Katie Joy, others, not just Katie Joy, but a pile of others tend to use these websites like Been Verified that do not have accurate information. So until I see a filed by the court document stamped showing that it was him committing domestic violence, I'm not going to believe that. Proof or it didn't happen. You also don't know the details about the arrest. Was it a case of self-defense? I thought about that, Java man. Sometimes that happens. And Unirock's girlfriend, Rachel, I guess is her name, is saying that it was the other way, that he was not abused, but he was not abusive, but his ex was abusive. That could happen too. Uh, Particularly when the police struggle with domestic violence and who to arrest. I've seen that happen so many times now. And domestic violence is always wrong, but I am a big believer that we need to do something about our police department. I mean, and that kind of goes in with the other thing I want to talk about was Tyre Nichols. I haven't watched a video of him being beaten up, and I'm not going to. What happened to him was awful. Should never happen to anybody. And I don't care what his race is or the race of the cops. That should just not ever happen, ever. And the thing about the police, and this is something I've been shouting from the rooftops for a long time, and I'm going to keep shouting. The police, what they do needs to be redone. Why do I say that? Because here there's 10,000 different police departments for everything you could imagine. There's police for the traffic. There's OIJ, which only handles serious crimes. There's all these different cop shops that handle different things. The police department also having a hell of a time dealing with frauditors, and a number of frauditors seem to be increasing. Yeah, I'll agree with that too. So they need to redo the whole thing about what the job entails. As society has changed, and that's a theme of today, the change of society. As society has changed, the police, their jobs have just gotten where more and more things are piled on them that literally should not be piled on them. What do I mean by that? I mean stuff like domestic violence calls, drug ODs, and drug and alcohol interactions, CPS calls, the kind of things that would be better served with social workers, people trained in drug and alcohol, CPS workers themselves. Cops are just, their plates are too full. And when you take somebody and you give them that kind of power, and then you overload them with all these jobs, these things are going to happen. I'm not saying they're right, they're wrong. Obviously, they're quite wrong. But something needs to happen. I'm beginning to think that our entire criminal justice system in the US needs to be redone from the bottom to the top, all the way, all the way. And that starts with changing what the police are actually responsible for. And no one really wants to be a cop these days because of that. And I know there's some cop shops that are super shorthanded as a result. The pandemic has pretty much turned everything on its head as far as, places to work and jobs and things. So we're talking about more people that are doing this crap, more and more. And I'm not excusing the cops because they're wrong. And like I said, I fell out with a very close friend over Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. And poor George Floyd is why I will not watch the video of what happened to Tyre Nichols. I've always had a kind of a sensitive soul, and I don't do well with injustice. I never have. I flip out sometimes. And I don't do well watching people be tortured. The George Floyd video, I cried so hard for a long time. I was like depressed for days after watching it because I just could not handle listening to that poor man crying for his mother, how much he wanted his mother as he was dying. I don't know how the cops, not just Chauvin, but the other two, how they could stand that. I don't know how the passerbyers didn't try to interfere more or say more. And I know some did, but that was just such an awful thing all the way around. There's no excuse for that. I don't care who it is, and I don't care who it is they're doing it to. There is literally no excuse for that. Oh, the current girlfriend would say that about her man. I also would have to see proof before I believe something like that about anyone. Yep. When you're in love with somebody and people are saying ugly things about them, sometimes you go into defense mode when it's inappropriate. Sometimes it's perfectly appropriate, but a lot of times women tend to do that. And it's like their man can do no wrong. I'm not in favor of that. We had a situation ourselves like 8 years ago where my husband was accused of something. And I didn't do the little woman thing. I didn't say, oh, it's terrible how they're falsely accusing you. I was like, dude, I'm sorry, but I need to see what the cops come up with this because it was something pretty egregious. Fortunately, the evidence showed that he had not done it. They were able to conclusively prove that he didn't do it. He wasn't charged. And there were some consequences in our little community. Even though he was cleared, there were some people that still believed it until the day we left. It was pretty awful. That is why we need the details about the situation and the rest. Surface details can be deceiving. Exactly, Java Man. So Unirock, I'm sorry they're doing that to you. And I just want to point out yet again that places like Been Verified are very not always accurate. I saw recently somebody was floating Michelle Savate's arrest record around and saying, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this. And you could see it wasn't accurate. It wasn't accurate at all. I am opposed to spending money on those things, especially if you're just going to use it to dox the person. And reading somebody's arrest record is pretty much doxing them as far as I'm concerned. An example was one paper that stated you were just as likely to survive jumping out of an airplane with a parachute as without. Of course, reading down in the paper, the plane is on the ground, plane on the ground. Yeah. So you got to be careful with these things. And like I said, I understand the tendency of women to stand by their man. It's just a natural thing. We all do it. And sometimes to our own detriment. The purpose of that paper was to show if you only read the headlines, you could be misled. Java Man, we all did that on Patheos one day. We all got in trouble for it, our section. We were all told, somebody came up with the idea of posting an inflammatory headline and an inflammatory sentence or two, and then after the read more saying, and you were just part of an experiment and fooled. I did it along with a few others, and mine was, you'll never guess what Josh Duggar has done now. And this was before the arrest for the films, but after the Ashley Madison reveal. And so I followed it. And a few people said in the comments, oh, you got me. And then I had one that said, what about Josh Duggar? I don't see anything about Josh Duggar here. Totally not getting the idea that headlines, many people read headlines in the first line or two. They never read deeper to get the real information. And that's a sad thing in our society, a sad thing, a cultural thing that we've really failed at. But the news and writing for the news has changed a lot since Ronald Reagan stripped away a lot of the legal reasons you would need to be factual in your reporting and allowed entertainment reporting to take place. When that happened, it did a tremendous disservice to us. So and the other thing I was outraged about this morning is I ran across a news article in one of my foodie links. I like to cook. As you can see, I'm a pretty good cook. I like to eat my own cooking. I'm a pretty decent cook. My husband can tell you we both struggle. And so I look at all these different food blogs and articles and things. This morning there was an article about baked potatoes. I love baked potatoes. Let me throw that out there. They are a good go-to if you're sick, especially if you're sick. You can nuke yourself a potato, put some broccoli and cheese on it, and go to town. It's one of those things like soup that's just instinctual. One thing that Reagan said was that my heart told me one thing, but the facts and the evidence are otherwise. About Iran-Contra, that is ridiculous. We are from Louisiana. Of course, we're good cooks. Represent, absolutely, we're good cooks down there. With one important exception I can think of. Actually, two. One of them is my mother. She doesn't cook. And so it was this big article about baked potatoes. But what it was telling you, oh, wow, you could bake potatoes in the oven. Did you know this? And I was jaw dropped. I was like, because I remember, well, I don't remember, I did this for years. If it was a really cold weather and we were struggling with cold weather, I would bake some potatoes in the middle of the day in the oven. I love them baked that way, but you have to have forethought and planning, so it doesn't always work out. But the big article was just carrying on about how you could bake them in the oven. And I was like, please don't tell me that is information has disappeared. I think in our information age, we stand a large amount. Yeah, Java Man, exactly. It could have been a KJ video. And I was just horrified by that. You know, this summer when I went to to Maryland to see my kids, and while my daughter was on her honeymoon and I was dog sitting, and I was there with her brother in the house, he asked me about gardening because he'd been talking about growing vegetable gardens. And he also asked me about canning. He was like, why didn't I pay attention to you when I was a kid? So what I did was I showed him how to make and can various things and how and where to plant. Because I could tell he was nervous about it. He kept talking about it. He kept buying seeds. He never launched. Well, now he's launched. But I started thinking about it. There's some forms of information that are disappearing. They're disappearing all the time. And that kind of makes me very sad. Numerous recipes on the internet about baking potatoes in the oven. The way that I do it is to smear it with olive oil, cover it with sea salt, bake for 1 hour. That's excellent, Java man. I've done it that way myself before. Basically, you've made it into a giant French fry. I used to have this recipe I got out of a book called Eating Royally, and it was, I think it's Merrill Weichert. I think that was his name. I'm not sure. And one of the recipes was for a potato a baking potato, he cut in tiny little slices, but still attached them the bottom. Added olive oil, added a little bit of butter, added a whole lot of sea salt, and baked it like that. So it was like this crispy fan, and that is the most delicious thing you could make. You can't make it in a microwave. It's got to be made in the oven. Well, if we tell them you can also bake them in the coals of fire, blow their mind. Exactly, Lorna. I remember being on the beach many a time with my father in which oh, pork, you're coughing. I'm going to take you in. Um, in which we stuck the potatoes right in the fire, wrapped our onions and corn on the cob with tinfoil and stuck it in the coals as well, and then boiled a few shrimp or whatever over the fire. Porky curl. I don't know. She's picked up some upper respiratory thing. I've got to take her to the doctor. This thing comes and goes with her. And so I wonder about basic education for people, just basic knowledge bases. I feel like it's changed so much in just the short lives. Well, in my lifespan, which is 62 years, things have changed. I mean, pretty tremendously. And I'm not always sure that they're for the better. So that was what I was thinking about today with ignoramus attacking Ginger and a pile of others. Everything, well, not everything, a lot of things she writes has no basis in anything remotely common sense or known. And I just, I thought at first she was an anomaly. Now I'm starting to see more and more people that are carrying on and doing that stuff. And you just wonder what the heck is going on out there. Yeah, I guess I'm just old. I'm old and I'm ranting because I'm old and I remember the good old days. Recent paper came out that researchers are now able to recreate Roman concrete. Awesome. Very awesome. I love when they recreate things like that. And I got a real kick out of the cooking blogs and things a couple of years ago when they recreated ancient sweet recipes like cookies and things. That was interesting. I actually made a batch just because I wanted to see what it was like. Um, yeah, so I think that's one reason I'm very interested in history. History has always been one of the things I'm obsessed with is because we can learn things from history. Our concrete tends to crumble after 50 years and doesn't react well to seawater. Java man, that's very true. So all these things in the past, there's actually an applicable for now because so many things like you're describing our concrete not being quite as good as Roman concrete. There are old things that we really need to be able to access in order to improve our world and what it's all about improving. Now, I want to talk a little bit before I go about quiverful men. Why? Because they tend to be the most awful guys on the planet, completely without self awareness. Many of them are somebody I would call beta, not somebody that would be large and in charge or powerful or alpha or anything like that. They're these weak, wimpy little guys that like to pretend they're some kind of warriors. And like I said, they use the umbrella that Bill Gothard came up with God, man, wife, and children as some type of thing so that they are perceived as a type of God, even. Someone pointed out, how does Roman concrete stand up to a freeze thaw cycle? Good question. I don't know. I don't know. And so these guys, they're just awful. So through my time at No Longer Quivering, I came to the realization it was no good to talk to them. It was no good to try and reason with them. That the best thing you could do is just block them and talk to the women. No Longer Quivering was geared towards women. It was geared towards women's issues and towards getting women out of the quiverful movement, pointing out the inherent dangers for women. So when these guys pop up and they want to talk to me, I'm just like, nope, block. When I quit writing NLQ 2 years ago, one of the first things I did was turn all of my social medias from my real legal name to some version of it mixed with nonsense so that I didn't have to deal with these guys. And I haven't dealt with them. Well, now that I'm in the final home stretch of getting my book ready, and I've started to change a lot of my social media back to my legal name, these guys are starting to flood into my timelines and various social media to try and fight with me or try to tell me as a woman what I'm doing is wrong. And I had forgotten how awful they are until I actually started dealing with a couple of them. There was one in particular, and when I mentioned him the other day here, he immediately posted about it and posted about me blocking him, rolling my eyes at them. Yeah, that's what I do. Roll my eyes, block, because I don't want to entertain that at all. So it was really funny. He started a pro quiverful, pro IBLP group on Reddit and was trying to get me over there to fight with people about it, telling me that he'd started a thread about me, the whole 9 yards. I was kind of like, whatever, block. So by blocking him, I earned another thread there. It was really kind of comical. And they've since taken it all down. They've since blocked him and taken his little thing down, which really made me laugh. Here's the thing. These guys are still going to get the block. They're going to get it more than ever. I'm hoping when I publish my book that I can breathe in, breathe out, and move on past quiverful altogether. I'm talking on Twitter with a pile of pastors about how do we wrestle our faith away from people who are so far from the doings of Jesus. My favorite one of all times, where Peter and others are fishing. They see a guy on the beach that asks them if they caught any fish. They said no. And the guy tells them to throw them out on the other side. The net breaks, they catch so many fish. And it's Jesus. And he's there on the beach. And guess what he's doing? He's cooking them breakfast. I think that the church is going to have to get back to that. Instead of wounding people, they need to heal the wounds. And by healing the wounds, the best thing you can do is meet the exact need and the exact need, like for the disciples. Their need in the moment was food, rest, so that they could be fully restored. And Jesus knew that. So he actually was cooking them breakfast. He didn't lecture them. He didn't preach a sermon while he was feeding them. He just was feeding them breakfast, cooking fish, cooking bread. And, I kind of like that about him. There's so much about the Bible and the Bible Christians, the ones that that I just can't stand, because the Bible is multifaceted like a gemstone. Every time you read it, you're going to see a different thing. He was being of service to them. Absolutely, he was being of service to them. If you're not willing to be of service to people and help them right where they are in the moment, then you're not, as far as I'm concerned, your faith is not genuine. Okay, you guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. My husband just came back from church. A friend of ours, just showed up to swim in the pool and sit in the hot tub. Our hot tub finally got switched over to salt water. So in a few days, when all the chemicals are burned off, Guess what I'm going to do for the first time in 3 years? I'm going to sit in the hot tub and go into not go into an immediate asthma attack because it's blowing chemicals up in my face. I can't wait. Love you guys so much. Take care. Thank you for listening to the rants of an old lady who is finding that life has moved into some places she never anticipated. But isn't that life? It changes all the time, and we have to figure out a way to live in the changes. Bye.